my homage to the gem of the Supreme Buddha. The Buddha is my refuge every day. May my homage to the gem of the Supreme Dhamma. The Dhamma is my refuge every day. May my homage to the gem of the Supreme Sangha. The Sangha is my refuge every day. May my homage to the Supreme Triple Gem. The Triple Gem is my refuge every day. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. Samanta cakkavalesu atra gaccantu devata saddhammang munirajassa sunantu saggamokkhadan ධම්මස්සවන කාලෝ අයං බදන්තා ධම්මස්සවන කාලෝ අයං බදන්තා ධම්මස්සවන කාලෝ අයං බදන්තා. May all divine beings arrive here to listen to sublime Dhamma expounded by the fully enlightened one. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Honor to the Supreme Buddha, the Blessed One, the Exalted One, the fully enlightened One. Meritorious devotees, Dhamma friends, today also you all are listening to, you all have come to listen to this Dhamma sermon in order to study or in order to get to know noble factors expounded by our fully enlightened one. We all know dispensations of the Buddha are very rare and human birth is very rare. At the time when these two has come together, these two have come together, what we have to do is to take refuge in the Triple Gem wholeheartedly and practice Dhamma. How can we practice Dhamma? We have to practice Dhamma according to what the Supreme Buddha has taught us. That is very, very important thing when we consider the present situation of the dispensation existing. Because majority of the monks and the laity tend to interpret the Dhamma according to their own way. Therefore, the followers, the devotees have gone astray. But still we have the canonical texts, what is called Tripitaka. Therefore, we can follow the Tripitaka always and practice Dhamma. Today I want to emphasize in relation to 6 bases, because as long as we are called birth, as long as we call birth, birth is births of 6 faculties: eye, ear, nose, tongue, body and mind. The birth of these faculties are the major factors which give rise to suffering. Suffering has arose due to 6 faculties. In the one of the discourses, Abhinanda discourse, Buddha explicates this factor very well. How he explicates is, Yo chakkung abhinandati dukkhanso abhinandati. If one accepts pleasurably eye, what he accepts is suffering. What he accepts is suffering. Yo dukkhang abhinandati aparimuttoso dukkhasmati vadami. When one accepts suffering happily, one cannot expect from suffering. Now, if one accepts ear happily, then what he accepts is suffering, according to Supreme Buddha. If one accepts suffering happily, one cannot escape from suffering. Aparimuttoso dukkhasmati vadami. Then if one accepts what is called nose happily, then he accepts what is called suffering. If one accepts suffering happily, one cannot escape from suffering. Then if one accepts tongue happily, what he accepts is what is called suffering. Yo jivang abhinandati dukkhanso abhinandati. If he accepts suffering happily, then he cannot escape from suffering. Now, if one accepts body happily, yo kayo abhinandati dukkhanso abhinandati. He accepts suffering. If one accepts suffering happily, then he cannot escape from suffering. Then meritorious devotees, mind. If one accepts mind happily, he accepts suffering. Yo manang abhinandati dukkhanso abhinandati. Yo dukkhang abhinandati aparimuttoso dukkhasmati vadami. Aparimuttoso dukkhasmati vadami. So, when he accepts suffering happily, he cannot escape from suffering. Now, this is the first idea explicated by Supreme Buddha in the Abhinanda discourse. So, there we have never thought of, we have never think of these six faculties are suffering. We have thought these six faculties are very pleasurable, pleasing and useful, important things for us, to our survival. One may tend to think, if we reject these six faculties, how can we live? People may tend to think. But the disciple, noble disciple, knows what Supreme Buddha says. Here is, now the Buddha wanted not for us to continue this sansaric life. Buddha wanted us to stop this sansaric life, because this is suffering, this is dangerous, this is painful. Existence is suffering. So, now this time you cannot understand this very much, because we are in a human plane, but there are so many planes, painful planes like purgatory or hell, preta world, and animal plane and asura world. So, we have to, according to our deeds, good or bad, conducted, be born in these unpleasurable planes. When we have to be born in these unpleasurable planes, we have to suffer. Now, how we have to suffer? We have to suffer through these senses. When these senses are there, we suffer through these senses. So, how we are born in the hell means birth of these senses. In the Preta world, these senses. In the animal plane, these senses. That is how we are born. Therefore, it is said these 6 bases are the ones which give us suffering. Jatipi dukkha. Now, when we are born, birth is suffering is meant by that. Jatipi dukkha. Jatipi dukkha means the rising of these 6 faculties. Earlier on, when we were young, when we were small, we are told in the Dhamma schools and in school this factor, Jatipi dukkha. But I did not understand as such what is the real meaning of this. Jatipi dukkha, birth is suffering. But when we experience suffering through these 6 faculties, now we really understand this birth of these 6 faculties is suffering. That is suffering. Because when these faculties are there, suffering arises. Now, eye, it has to undergo diseases. Ear, it has to undergo diseases. Nose, it has to undergo diseases. Tongue, it has to undergo diseases. Body, it has to undergo diseases. Mind, it has to undergo diseases. So, every faculty has various diseases. And also, now the birth of these things are suffering and existence of these things are suffering, and also illness come upon them is suffering. So, yo jakkung abhinandati, yo sotang abhinandati, yo ghanang abhinandati, yo jivha abhinandati, yo kayo abhinandati, yo mano abhinandati, dukkhaso abhinandati means that. That means all these things, if we accept happily, that is suffering. So, we are the one who have accepted these things. How we have accepted these 6 faculties? By gratification. By gratification. Having seen beautiful pictures, we satisfied ourselves. We became happy. That means we accepted them happily. Abhinandati. Then we especially usualize about them. Abhivadati. And then ajjosaya titthati. Ajjosaya titthati means we are we were there now. We were in ajjosaya titthati. Now, these 3 factors takes place. What are the 3 factors? Abhinandati, that means we accept them first and foremost. Abhivadati, we start visualizing. That means we start claiming the qualities of them. Then we start get into it. That means ajjosaya titthati. When these three steps takes place, that means we are using this faculty for the existence. If we don't accept anabhinandati, then anabhivadati, anajjosaya titthati, then this faculty does not come into being again. But we don't do like that. We are practicing, or we have been practicing the first methodology. Abhinandati, abhivadati, ajjosaya titthati. That method. We tend to accept the form or sound or taste or other thoughts. So we tend to accept them happily, and we start to talk about them happily. Then we get into them happily. So this is the methodology that we practice always. So we have been doing so for thousands of millions and trillions of years in the samsara. That is why we cannot escape from this circle of birth. If we really understand this circle of birth, this process, then we can get out of this process and put an end to this samsaric life. So then if we do not accept this I happily, then we can escape. Yo chakkung nabhinandati, dukkhanso nabhinandati. So Buddha says in that discourse, if you don't accept this I happily, you don't accept suffering. Dukkhanso nabhinandati. Yo dukkhan nabhinandati, parimuttoso dukkhasmati vadami. If you don't accept suffering happily, then you can escape from this suffering. Yo sotan nabhinandati, dukkhanso nabhinandati. If you don't accept ear happily, you don't accept suffering. If you don't accept suffering happily, you can escape from suffering. Then meritorious devotees, yo ghanan nabhinandati. If you don't accept the nose happily, you don't accept the nose happily. That means you don't accept suffering happily. If you don't accept suffering happily, you can escape from suffering. Then if you accept jivha, that means tongue, happily, yo jivha nabhinandati. If you don't accept the tongue happily, that means you don't accept suffering happily. If you don't accept suffering happily, you can escape from suffering. Then if you don't accept the body, yo kayo nabhinandati, dukkhanso nabhinandati. That means you don't accept suffering. Yo dukkhang nabhinandati. If you don't accept suffering happily, parimuttoso dukkhasmati vadami. That means you can escape from this suffering. Yo mano nabhinandati. If you don't accept this mind happily, that means you don't accept the mind. You don't accept suffering happily. If you don't accept suffering happily, you can escape from suffering. Now, this is the theoretical explanation given by the fully enlightened one in the Abhinanda discourse. Now, we must try to examine and analyze and try to understand what is being said by the fully enlightened one, and whether we are able to practice this easily. Now, on the one hand, we can understand this methodology is not very easy, but our disciples at that time, they practiced this methodology and they escaped from this dangerous samsaric life. Therefore, what we have to do is to control our senses. These 6 faculties, it is the basic thing here. We have to control our faculties. So, Buddha from the very beginning has expounded Dhamma in order to control these 6 faculties. In order to do so, Buddha has laid down precepts for the disciples. So, disciples then accepted those precepts and practiced the precepts. When they practice precepts, now 227 precepts for the higher ordinated monks have been laid down. Why they have been laid down? In order to control the senses. When we practice these precepts, then we can control these senses. When we control the senses, then what has been explicated by the Buddha take place. That means, then we don't accept those forms, sounds and other tastes and tangibility and thoughts, we don't accept happily, because we have controlled our senses. When we controlled our senses, we can practice this methodology. Therefore, now I think you are to a certain extent have been able to understand this methodology, because Buddha has used various methodologies into explanations. Now, one of the most important methodologies is this 6 faculties explanation. Another one is 5 aggregates of clinging. Other one is 4 elements. Now, if we have fully understanding of one of these methodologies, we can end samsaric cycle of births. So, this is very interesting part and very important part, because we can understand 6 faculties very easily. However, this is found in Sanyutta Nikaya section 4, Salayatana Sanyutta, about deeper explanation about 6 faculties. So, if you have time, you had better read those discourses which explain more than what I have told to you now, because there are various discourses there. Now, I am explaining one discourse, but there are so many discourses that you can read there. Various ways of explanations can be seen there regarding eye, ear, nose, tongue, body and mind. Therefore, you must strive to read those discourses, sutras in Samyutta Nikaya, section 4, and then you will be able to practice them, and then you will be able to get some understanding about these faculties, how dangerous of their birth. We have to suffer due to the birth of these 6 faculties. Otherwise, we do not want to suffer. When these 6 faculties are born, we have to suffer definitely. If these 6 faculties are extinct, then no suffering. The end of suffering is there. Jati kina, that means birth is ended, then suffering is no more. Therefore, meritorious devotees, Dhamma friends, you must strive to understand this Abhinanda discourse and try to control your faculties, and may you be able to comprehend this Dhamma within the regime of Gautama Buddha Sasana. May the Noble Triple Gem bless with you all. Akasattha ca Bummatta Devanaga Mahiddhika Punyantang Anumoditva Chiran Rakkantu Buddha Sasanang. Akasattha ca Bummatta Devanaga Mahiddhika Punyantang Anumoditva Chiran Rakkantu Buddha Desanang. Akasattha ca Bummatta Devanaga Mahiddhika Punyantang Anumoditva Chiran Rakkantu Tan Sada. May you all be well and happy.